Um, so I do want to welcome you all again to this fourth session of our series, Faith Leadership in the Context of Climate Change. And once again, I'm so appreciative of each one of you carving out time in busy schedules to be here for this series. I would invite you to write your name, your position, where you're zooming in from, your church affiliation in the chat if you'd like to do that. The first session of our series, we focused on better understanding climate change as the context for doing ministry. And we had a climate scientist, Dr. Lee Stearns, helping us understand the science of climate change, the impacts, the solutions for that. Then we moved on in the second session to have the Reverend Dr. Greg Hunt speak to us about the biblical, theological, and ethical perspectives of climate change, laying for us an eco-theological grounding for our ministry. A couple weeks ago, we had the privilege of having Dr. Rachel Wheeler talk to us about eco-spirituality and how to nurture spirituality and faith practices in the context of climate change. And today we're very fortunate to have the Reverend Dr. Leah Shade with us to speak to us about pastoral leadership in the context of climate change, preaching, teaching, leading worship, talking about climate change and dealing with conflict. We'll explore together how to engage in pastoral leadership and preaching in the context of the climate crisis and the widening political divide that is causing so much conflict within our country. We have someone very well qualified to speak to us about this, and I did send out a fuller bio to you in the email earlier. But the Reverend Dr. Leah Shade is Associate Professor of Preaching and Worship at Lexington Theological Seminary in Kentucky and served as the President of the Academy of Homiletics in 2024. She's an ordained minister in the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America since the year 2000 and has served in congregations in rural, suburban, and rural settings. She earned her MDiv and her PhD from the Lutheran Theological Seminary at Philadelphia, now the United Lutheran Seminary. She's written a couple of books, Creation, Crisis Preaching, Ecology, Theology, and the Pulpit, and Preaching in the Purple Zone, Ministry in the Red-Blue Divide. She's written a creation-centered Lenten devotional you might consider for the beauty of the earth, and has co-edited Rooted and Rising, Voices of Courage in a Time of Climate Crisis. Leah served as an anti-fracking and climate activist, community organizer, and advocate for environmental justice issues. She is the eco-preacher blogger for Patheos and a partner in the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development, creating a monthly resource called Eco Preacher 123. And she is currently directing a Lilly-funded grant project, Compelling Preaching in a Climate-Changed World. So a lot of wisdom and experience that she's bringing to us today. She will speak for about an hour, and then again, we'll have the opportunity to comment on what she has to say, to ask questions, to engage in discussion with one another. While she's talking, I encourage you to mute yourself for consideration of others in the recording. But then during that discussion time, unmute yourself and engage in conversation as you're wanting to do that. So we are very eager to welcome you, Dr. Shade, and we're delighted that you are present with us today, and we look forward to what you have to share with us.
Thank you so much, Ruth, and it's great to meet all of you. This is such an important topic for pastors and congregations to be thinking about and doing ministry about. And so the fact that you're not just taking today, but you're like part of this whole series just speaks to your commitment to protecting, caring for, preserving God's creation. And that does my heart good to see all of your names and faces on the screen. I am going to share my PowerPoint here in a bit. I will tell you that I'm actually going to pause at different times throughout the PowerPoint to see if you have some questions. So if you want to put some things in the chat, as I'm going. Just like if you're like, oh, I want to remember to ask that, feel free. And Ruth, maybe you can track that. But then, yes, we're going to have more dedicated time in the last half hour to talk through more of the implications of this. I will also let you know that I will send a PDF of this PowerPoint to Ruth to share with all of you. I'm also going to be sharing a resource, a worksheet for how to do eco preaching 1, 2, 3 that she had mentioned. So want to make sure you have tools for doing this work. Okay, I am going to share my screen. All right. My topic today is pastoral leadership in the context of climate change. And I've been asked to speak about preaching, teaching, worship, and navigating conflict as we're trying to engage in this ministry. As Ruth mentioned, I teach at Lexington Theological Seminary. I'm celebrating 25 years of ordained ministry. I've written a bunch of books, and the ones that I'm going to draw on most for today are creation crisis preaching and preaching in the purple zone, and also preaching in social issues, because environmental issues are social issues. So I've been doing a lot of research around how pastors can navigate the red-blue divide while they are preaching the prophetic gospel about these issues that are affecting people's lives, their families, their communities, and God's creation. Let's talk a little bit about why it matters that clergy preach and teach about environmental issues. More than 10 years ago, they started researching this. So there was a survey that was done in 2014, and they found that Americans whose pastors talk about climate change were more likely to believe it exists than those whose pastors do not. Also, more than 6 in 10 Americans who said they heard about climate change from their clergy at least occasionally were either very or somewhat concerned about climate change, compared with 40% who said they never hear it raised and they're not really that concerned. What does this tell us? It means that parishioners are listening. They may not always agree because of the way they've been socialized to push back against certain issues, but they are listening to the sermons about these issues. My team and I have been doing surveys of clergy and preaching and social issues since 2017. And I'm going to share with you just a little slice of data from the thousands of preachers that we have been surveying since 2017. And I'm going to do a little quiz with you. One of the questions we asked was, which topics have you talked about in your sermons? We gave them a whole list of topics, everything from gun violence to racism and climate environmental issues was on the list. So we asked, did you preach on these issues in the previous year? So what percentage do you think said that they talked about climate or environmental issues in their sermons in 2016, so almost 10 years ago? If you said 30%, you would be correct. Now, at the time when I did the survey, I was really dismayed by this, because that's only a third of preachers saying that they're talking about these issues in their congregations. Well, we've been tracking it ever since. And we asked the same question in 2024. And I'm happy to share that 78% said that they talked about climate or environmental issues in their sermons or in teaching in general. So that is a huge shift that we saw in our surveys. Now, these surveys were anonymous, so we don't know if it was the same pastors every time. But as we're triangulating other issues, we actually saw an increase in almost all of the social issues from 2016 to 2024. So that is great. Preachers are stepping up to the plate, but the increase for environmental issues was really heartening. However, other research is showing different aspects of preaching environmental issues. So the Pew Research Center did a survey where they talked with 10,000 Americans about their views about religion and the environment. And this was in 2022. And what they found is that people who attend church don't hear about climate change in their congregations. The majority, 70%, say that they are not hearing about climate change in sermons. It's about 63% for mainline Protestants, but that's still an alarmingly high number saying, well, yeah, I never hear about this in church. Only 21% say that they're talking about climate change with people in their congregation. So if 63% of mainline Protestant congregants are saying that they are not hearing sermons on climate and environmental issues, and our survey is showing that almost 80% of mainline Protestant clergy are saying that, well, yes, I am. I'm talking about this. There must be some kind of disconnect. Like what we're saying and what they're hearing are two different things. So there have been other studies about this as well, about the clergy silence, or at least perceived silence on climate change. A study came out this year showing that 90% of US Christian religious leaders believe that humans are driving climate change. That's huge. I mean, so they believe in science, but nearly half have never mentioned climate change or humans' role in it to their congregations. And only a quarter have spoken about it more than once or twice. So they're showing a lower percentage than what we're seeing in our surveys. And even more interesting is that there was a survey this year of like 700,000 recorded sermons since 2020. And they analyze not just what people say that they're doing, but the actual content of sermons. And they show that less than 5% are mentioning the term climate change or related terms. So only about 5% of the United Church of Christ, only 2% of Presbyterians, 0.43% of Southern Baptists, and 0.4% of Roman Catholics. They were really focusing on Roman Catholics because they wanted to see, did it make a difference that Pope Francis had written 2 encyclicals about climate change and the justice issues around that. And for US priests, it obviously made no difference. Like they actually stonewalled talking about it in their congregations. The other thing to note is that when there's a difference between what preachers think they might be saying, and if they're not using the words climate change, then it's not registering for people. And it's a tricky thing because we did a survey of 10 congregations in the Disciples of Christ Church about 5 years ago. And we gave them a list of terms and said, what is too political to hear in a sermon? And we gave terms like racism and COVID and guns. And within this list, we gave a list of 3 different terms because I was testing, are there certain terms that are more triggering than others? So we gave the terms climate change, environmental issues, and God's creation. So climate change came in the top 5 of like, you can't talk about this, it's too political. Environment is a little bit lower, but the term God's creation, nobody had a problem with that. That was like, yeah, that's fine. So it raises an interesting question for pastors, like, can I talk about climate change without using that term that might get me some pushback? And so some people have been encouraging pastors to do what we call code switching, using terms that at least get people thinking about this and, don't send them screaming out of the church saying that they want to fire the pastor because they're getting too political. But what we lose on the other end are clear messages that climate change and the justice issues around that are a matter of faith that Christians need to address and the church needs to address. So obviously there's a big gap there. And I'm starting to now encourage pastors to use the term climate change so that people are hearing that in sermons. So I'm very interested to think about how we can most effectively equip, empower, and accompany clergy and congregations for addressing the climate crisis. That has been an important thing for me for like 20 years. And there's a lot of research showing that it makes a difference when congregations address ecological justice issues. So, for example, sorry, get this little box out of the way. Christian congregations whose ministers integrate climate science into their faith formation can play an integral role in addressing the climate and environmental crisis. Another study showed that congregations can shape attitudes and actions related to justice issues, including climate change and ecological stewardship. Another study showed that caring for God's creation is not just an ethical or political issue, but it is really deeply rooted in the theological understandings of God, humanity, and creation. And you've already had in this series presentations that have made that case, and that is great. Like that is the foundation on which we are building. Also, the greening movement in Christian denominations does show that there has been some movement of churches embracing environmental care as a core aspect of faith and integrating it into worship, education, and outreach. One of the ways that I've been trying to equip pastors to do this is to create a resource called Eco Preacher 123. And I've done this in collaboration with the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development. And once a month during the 3 years of the lectionary cycle, we took one or two of the passages from a particular Sunday in the lectionary. And I gave, first of all, one eco idea based on ecological exegesis, and then offered two ecological questions to go deeper, and then offered three eco actions that congregations might take to respond to the message. When I send the PowerPoint with this, I will send you a worksheet for you to practice doing this with any text that you are preaching. A way to like, what's going on in the text? Where is creation showing up? Where is God's interaction with creation showing up? And what are the implications for us? Another thing that I have been involved with is called the Eco Preacher Cohort. And this is part of the Lilly grant. It's a $1.25 million grant that we received from Lilly Foundation. This is a 5-year grant to address compelling preaching in a climate change world. And one of the aspects of this program is what we call the Eco Preacher Cohort, which is a year-long online program for people to come together once a month to learn from expert practitioners and homileticians, companion each other. We have what we call kinship groups, and explore different ways to talk about these issues in sermons. So we really try to partner with a lot of different voices like social science researchers and environmental faith activists to expand the toolbox for preachers to be able to engage this work in their congregations. Now, I just want to say, when we talk about eco preaching, what am I talking about? Well, eco preaching is climate-informed, ecologically grounded preaching that inspires, encourages, and guides people to know and love God, to experience the rootedness of Christian community, to embrace Christian discipleship, and to proclaim the gospel through faith in action. So this is really grounded in our identity as people of faith, people of Christ, and thinking about what are the implications for that in a climate change world. So we take as our premise that religious leaders are viewed as moral guides. So their sermons and their teaching can shift climate discourse within faith communities. And what we're exploring is how, when they do this program, how can eco-preachers strengthen their gifts, address their challenges, and look for different opportunities to do this work in their congregations that maybe they hadn't thought of before. And we also have been, we've been surveying the eco-preachers with intake and exit surveys at the beginning and end of our program, but we've also been talking with their congregational leaders. We invite the pastors to identify up to 10 people in their congregations to take surveys as well, because we want to hear not just from the preachers, but from those who listen to the sermons, from those who are active in their churches. And we want to see what are they saying about the church's capacity for living out their faith in a climate change world. So we've been doing these intake and exit surveys. We've had several hundred participants so far, mostly mainline Protestant. Most of them are white, but very geographically diverse. And we are making efforts to be more expansive and inclusive in our recruitment of people from all different backgrounds, African American and Latinx and Asian American, all of those different ones as well. We've got 5 years to do this, so we're working on that. So here's one thing that's really interesting. We found when we talk with these pastors and their congregation leaders that they all scored very high on their concern about the environment and climate change. Like 85 to 90%, they're saying, yeah, this is a very important issue. That's great. But we found that preachers were underestimating their congregation's concerns. So we asked the eco-preachers, what do you think is influencing your congregation to respond to climate change? And we asked congregational leaders, what do you think is motivating people? So you can see the eco-preachers say, well, about 64% maybe are concerned about future generations. The congregational leaders are saying, no, I think it's closer to 88%. Concerns about animals, plants, and ecosystems. The eco-preachers are saying, maybe about 36%. No, say the congregational leaders, that 80% of our congregation is concerned about this. Impacts on the local community. About a third of the preachers saying, yeah, this is important to my folks. No, say the congregational leaders, 61% are concerned about this. And is it a matter of religious obligation? Like, does the Bible, does our faith compel us to do this? And the eco-preachers are saying, maybe about a third of my members are this. And the congregational leaders are saying, no, more than half of our people would be concerned about this. Okay, big gaps here that we're seeing. So what helps to explain this? First of all, there's not a lot of communication about this. This sort of verifies what I showed you in the previous slide, that people are like, when pastors aren't talking about this, it's not creating space for people to share and talk with each other and with the pastor about this. So there's just like lack of knowledge. And it also demonstrates that there is, I think, some fear on the part of pastors to talk about these issues because they don't think that their congregation would support them talking about this. And this is due to the fact that if they have talked about it in the past, the ones who've given the most pushback are a very small minority. It's usually, in our surveys, it's maybe like between 5 and 10% that are saying you can't talk about this. But they're often the loudest, the ones who are in positions of power and influence, and the ones that control the purse strings. So it's a minority that is controlling the narrative, when in fact, the majority of the congregation actually wants the pastor to talk about these things and to help them make sense of what is going on in this world using biblical and theological and ethical frameworks. We also saw that when we asked them what are the barriers to your congregation being involved with this, that there's a mismatch here as well. For the eco preachers, their number one reason why people don't want to talk about this is politics, not for congregational leaders. They think that their congregation is not responding because they're getting older and they don't have as much ability to do this. And they don't have a lot of time and energy and resources. Um, Politics does come in on the right-hand column. That should actually say 13. Somehow that number got missed. But notice on the eco preachers, at the bottom is age and physical ability. And that's the number one reason for congregational leaders. So again, there's a mismatch between what preachers think and what congregation leaders think. So like one eco preacher said, environmental justice has become a political trigger word for them. Certainly, that is certainly the case. But one of the congregational leaders said, I think we struggle with what, how, and where. There is so much to be done. I wonder if we are overwhelmed on where to start. So if we're not even having basic conversations about this in our congregations, and we're making assumptions about what people think and say, and we're not creating space to do some really good work about this, then then we get this mismatch. So our assessment is that there is a lack of biblical, theological, and spiritual infrastructure. So we found when we asked people to say, what does care of creation mean for you? That people struggled to articulate their Christian vocation in a climate change world. Like they couldn't understand that their religious identity is connected with what's happening on this planet. We also found that there was a seed on soil problem, that people don't have the biblical and theological resources in order for these sermons or teachings or, any of this to start to gain roots. And also they're not doing things like going out in the church grounds and worshiping outside or learning the names of the plants and the trees around their church or going into the local urban area and turning it into a community garden. Like those things aren't happening. Or if they are happening, they're not being framed as this is what God calls us to do. This is part of our vocation to till and to keep, as we learn in Genesis 2:15. So in our program, we're testing a couple of different strategies to revitalize biblical, theological, and spiritual soil, teaching people how to use an eco-hermeneutical lens in their Bible studies, in their sermons and pastoral conversations, teaching them how to do different eco-spiritual practices, creating pollinating opportunities for people to talk about and share what is a place in creation that you love that you're seeing being affected by climate change, getting people to relate to this emotionally instead of just engaging in intellectual debates, doing book studies and community dialogues and personal testimony. Eco America's Blessed Tomorrow Climate Ambassadors Program trains people to have these conversations in their churches. And then for those that are doing some of this, to deepen and expand the root system between people and nature, thinking about what are the local environmental issues that our congregation cares about, because this is where we live. This is our place. So can we engage in preserving natural places? Because this is part of our job as the church. And I also, in my book, Creation Crisis Preaching, I give a who is my neighbor mapping exercise. So people can think about who is my neighbor, not just among my human kin, but also among my earth kin. And what is my moral responsibility? What is our moral responsibility to care for them? Let me pause there and see if there are questions that you have about what I've shared so far.
I think Sue had a question. And that was that, what are the words and phrases used in analyzing the preaching on climate change? I don't know if you wanted to say more about that question, Sue.
Yeah. So the study that they did was so the reason they were able to get all this data was because of COVID, actually, and all of those services that were online. And they took, again, it's like no one's ever done this before. It's like 700,000 sermons. They took it, they they ran them through um, and looking for words like climate, environment, climate change, global warming, like any of those related terms. And they, like which one of these said this? What they found was the times when there was a spike in this would be around Earth Sunday and St. Francis Day, the Feast of St. Francis. So they did see spikes in mentioning that, but the rest of the year, like nothing. So it's sort of like, okay, we're going to check the box because we have to, because it's sort of a cultural thing on Earth Day, but uh, you know, the rest of the time we're just not going to care about it. So yes, that's that they used not just climate change but other related terms, but they didn't put things like creation or God's creation. That like that would have been too vague. They were actually looking for the terms that had to do with climate change.
So I'll just add on to that and say that I can relate to the spike that you just described.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we've talked about using the term creation care, and so I appreciated your comment about daring to use the word climate change.
Right.
Um, so yeah, we're slowly but surely, I think, integrating more creation care conversations into more of our life at church, but it's tentative because I have um, basically a split congregation in terms of,
Hmm.
if we're talking about colors, red and blue, right?
Yes, yes.
So yeah, but I'm fortunate that my upbringing was very much tied to the land and the earth because I grew up on a farm, and I make no apologies about that. And so I have it in me to do that. It's just part of trying to understand the context and when and where and how they will accept it without, wanting to run me off the cliff, so to speak.
Yeah. Sue, I really hear that. I'm going to give you some pointers on how to bridge some of those divides in a minute. But I'll just say really quickly that knowing people's stories and their connections with the land is really
Mhm.
important. One of the things that I've experimented with my students is to have them do what I call an environmental biography. So writing down like who first taught you to love nature and where were your favorite spots in nature growing up. So just activating those core memories that have to do with those places that we love. And then questions like, were there places in nature that you saw either destroyed or poisoned or compromised in some way? And what was that like for you? How did you feel? And what did you learn from your grandparents about gardening or cleaning up the river or things like that to help people reconnect, and
Mhm.
then to have conversations about what are we seeing now, that can we start to connect the dots, like when we see the growing zones shift so dramatically and the droughts and the catastrophic storms, like this is not part of the natural cycle. What is happening here? So if you can start at the personal level and then
Mhm.
start making those connections outward, that is one way to help bridge those gaps.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for your question, Sue. Okay, I'm gonna move on. Go back to my screen share here. Okay, so how do you navigate conflict around environmental issues in congregations? because it really does depend on your context. When I was a pastor serving in central Pennsylvania, about 30 minutes south of where fracking is happening, when I tried to talk about those issues, I had to be very careful about what I said because I knew some people worked in the industry, some people leased their land there. And so I had to be very creative and very pastoral in talking with people ahead of time before I would preach, so that I would say, I'm going to talk about the need to protect God's water on the baptism of Jesus Sunday. And I want to talk about, what's happening with these fluids that are being put into our watershed. So having those conversations with people ahead of time sometimes lowers the temperature and gets people involved and encourages them to share their stories and their concerns with you, so that you can move forward as a congregation, not just as, I'm the pastor, I see what's wrong, you're all doing it wrong, sort of a finger wagging thing. So if it's a more collaborative thing, that can help. Now, one of the things that I have found very helpful in these conversations are the 6 moral frameworks of Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Disagree About Religion and Politics. If you haven't read this book, I really recommend it. These frameworks are good, not just for environmental issues, but also for any social issues where people seem to be talking past each other because they're like in different worlds, like different realities. And what Jonathan Haidt says is that there is no one framework for determining what is right or wrong. There are actually 6. And he's a social psychologist. And so he's studied different human societies and figured out that there are 6. This is his theory, by the way. There have been some who push back on this, but it's a pretty good place to start when you're trying to have these conversations. So one is care versus harm. This is the primary framework of the Bible. The moral good is what takes care of the most people and the least of these. Another moral framework is fairness versus cheating. Nobody wants to feel like they're being cheated out of anything. People want things to be fair. Liberty versus oppression. Everybody wants to feel autonomous and free. No one wants to feel that they are being oppressed. Loyalty versus betrayal. If you are part of a particular team or a group, if you do things that seem to be showing that you are not part of that, then you are deemed a traitor, and that is a moral no-no. Authority versus subversion. So this is the idea that we have to respect our elders, and we have to respect our parents, and we have to respect those who make the rules. All of that is good unless they are abusing their power and they are using the law to actually violate the first one, care versus harm, in which case sometimes subversion is the moral good because you're trying to make things more fair or more free for others. And then the last one is sanctity versus degradation. So the idea that there is sacredness, and the things that we do that would either pollute that or in some way compromise that is not a moral good. So when you're engaging in a conversation with people and they seem to be coming at you with things that you like, this doesn't make sense to me, and it seems to be going into this intellectual debate, a way to engage in the conversation is just to step back in yourself and say, okay, what is the moral framework that this person is using? So, for example, in let's say with environmental issues, we would often hear people say, well, we should be, and I'm going to use liberty versus oppression, human beings are free to use whatever we want because God gave it to us. It says they're right in the Bible. So if you're telling us that we need to regulate or not do fracking or whatever, you are oppressing us. You are taking away our freedom. So if somebody would come at me with that, instead of me arguing with them right off the bat, I would simply say, oh, it sounds like freedom and liberty are really important to you. And that gives them pause because they're expecting you to come back at them with, fighting back. And instead, you are actually recognizing the moral framework that they're coming from. That helps to lower the temperature and kind of does a little jujitsu there to say, okay, I'm with you. I think freedom is really important too. And can I share with you what's important for me? And you might say, it's really important to me that God's creatures, that this forest, that this river also have freedom to be able to live without poisons and to flourish because God said it is all good and God created it all. And so I'm really interested in how we care for those creatures and how we make things fair for all creatures to be able to live a full and flourishing life. So there you see that you're using 3 of those moral frameworks. Another way that you can use these moral frameworks is with the sanctity versus degradation. When people say, we can just rip down these forests and we can sell the wood and we can just put in the freeways and whatever. One way is to say this is God's earth. This is God's temple. And even if you're talking with somebody who's not religious, to say this is America's sacred holy ground. And when we take it away, we are degrading it. We are violating that which is sacred. So that's a way to use that moral framework. So what I'm saying is that these frameworks can give us a way to start to find out what is important to the people who might be pushing back, align with them to say, yeah, this is important to me too, and what are ways that we can find some common ground. So when we've been doing this with our eco-preachers, we've seen some common ground emerge among eco-preachers and congregations. So literally the common ground of the like where they are. So thinking about the land and food waste and food access, talking about those local things can resonate with people. In the congregation where I was talking about fracking, it was easy for some people to say, well, I go up there to work and then I come down here and I live, and so it doesn't really affect me. It did, but I wouldn't argue with them on that. But when we had, when there was the threat of a proposed tire incinerator for our area, and people realized like this is going to be awful for public health, and like most of them all have a fail rate that's like 80%, and they just, if you've ever seen a tire fire, multiply that times 100. So the congregation that was not always happy with me talking about fracking was very happy to have me talk about the tire burner, and that we want to protect the health of our children and the health of our community. So the local framing makes a difference. Also, finding the scripture passages that connect us with our faith identity and with God's creation. Again, that's what the eco preacher is for, but that can help, like doing that, getting people exercising that part of their interpretive lens can be really helpful. Also, there are people in congregations who are actually in deep grief and mourning about what's happening. And so when we don't say anything about this in our preaching and teaching, it feels like the church does not care. So it's important to recognize that there are some people who are deeply moved, deeply just grieving about this. So it's okay to create actually grief rituals for those who want to participate, and allow open sharing about what have we lost and what are we trying to save. And then framing ecological ministry as consistent with our Christian baptismal identity. So again, protecting the waters of creation, thinking about our sacramental practices, thinking about why protecting the land and the water and the air means that our bread and our wine or our juice, like this is how we experience the presence of God. And if we are not protecting the very earth that creates that, we are violating our ability to connect with God. Thinking about our vocation. Who are we called to be as Christians in this? And how does it fit in with our mission? Who do we understand ourselves to be? Making disciples of all nations. And how does this affect our mission in our community and in the wider world? Another thing that we found is that there are some congregations that are doing a little, like, okay, we changed all of our light bulbs. That's great. Or, hey, we're recycling. That's great. But they might not be doing things that are deeper and expansive. And so we are recommending what we call a yes and approach. So affirming the existing eco actions and expanding into rituals of grief and hope, place-based justice rooted initiatives, theological grounding and kinship with creation, and community partnerships and organizing, doing things with other local congregations that also care about this can be really rejuvenating for a church. So what are the implications for church leaders such as yourself? It's important to clarify and contextualize terms. And it's not just about, okay, you got to use the term climate change. One of the things that we found when we did some site visits with congregations is that there was a church in Dayton, Ohio, an African American church. And when we talked about when the congregation leaders took the survey and they were asked about their concerns about environmental issues, what they had in their minds was polar bears. And like, oh, you mean you want us to save the polar bears? Well, actually, I'm just trying to survive here in this urban wasteland, and I really can't care about the polar bears. So no, I'm not really concerned about environmental issues. So then when I went there and when I talked with the pastor and the congregation, I said, tell me about what kind of pollution is around here. And they're like, oh, well, we've got the local Honeywell site is closed down and it's a Superfund site and it's really toxic. And over here is the dump and it smells awful. And we've been trying to do something about this for years. And a lot of our parishioners live in homes where there's not good upkeep because they rent, and there's asbestos and mold in the walls, and they all, like, so many people here have asthma. And I said, do you realize that each one of these are environmental justice issues? And they're like, really? It's like, yeah, just think about the air in the homes where your parishioners are. That is the ruach, that is the nefesh, that is the breath of life. And when we are not enabling people to take in the breath that is God's gift, that is a violation of God's creation. I shared this with the pastor. He's like, oh my gosh, I never thought of it like that before. I was like, yeah, you could preach a sermon about why the church caring about these issues and caring about what happens at the Superfund site and what happens in the local dump. This is God's creation. This is our piece of God's beautiful Eden that was entrusted to us, and our leaders need to be responsible for this. So being careful and contextual about our terms is really important. Continuing to frame environmental engagement in scripture and theology. So, for example, at the same church, I knew that they had a community garden. They've been doing it for decades. And I said, I said to the pastor, did you ever preach a sermon about this? He's like, no, why would I? I mean, I mentioned it as like one of the good things that we do. I said, well, did you ever connect it to God putting the first human beings in a garden and saying, this is for you to till and to keep? He's like, oh, wow, I could totally do that. I was like, yes, there's ministry that's already happening. It's like, you do a community cleanup every year. And you could be talking about this is what it means to till and to keep, to take care of. He's like, oh my gosh, all of these missed opportunities. I was like, yeah, once you put a green lens in front of your Bible and you start to see where these connections are, you can show that the things that you were already doing are part of caring for God's creation. Offering rituals and community practices. So there are some churches that are doing lots of letter writing campaigns and doing a lot of good work, but they might not be doing things to really help them connect with God's creation, like going into the forest and doing forest bathing rituals, like the deep breathing in the forest, and learning how to commune, like to really pay attention to some aspect of God's creation. That is so important for grounding them and sustaining this work for the long term. Building peer learning cohorts for clergy support. One of the things that we found with our Eco Preacher program is that being able to be in a group of people who are accompanying you in this makes all the difference, because you're not alone. You're hearing what other people are doing. You're learning from them. They're learning from you. And it just creates this feeling of like, oh my gosh, we do this together. And it's a great boost for this ministry. So along those lines, I will let you know that we are starting an Eco Preacher sermon coaching group in January as part of our grant. And this is going to be a monthly online gathering for preachers to actually workshop a sermon that they want to preach on an environmental issue in their church. So it's a 6-month program from January to June, and we're going to have actual homileticians meeting with these groups to do this sermon listening. So if you're interested in this, there's a QR code. It will also be in the PowerPoint PDF that I'll send to you. But we'd love to have, if you're like, oh my gosh, I want to learn how to do this, this Eco Preacher sermon coaching group could be for you. So overall, what we want to do is to think about sermons and teaching and ministry that is not just like a lone ornamental planting in a carefully tended topiary garden. Like, okay, I'm just doing this on Earth Day and it's all well crafted and it's beautiful, but that's it. Like, there's nothing else that goes on. Instead, we want sermons and ministry that's part of an ecosystem of deeply rooted engagement in biblical, theological, and spiritual resources that support an ecosystem, a faith community that is committed to healing Earth and all of her kin. Okay, let me pause there and see if there are questions so far. Questions, comments, responses, things that troubled you, things that inspired you. Yeah, go ahead, Sue.
I really appreciate the 6 moral frameworks. So I hope to put that into practice ASAP, as you mentioned. And it's just a way to exegete the congregation a little bit better for more effective
Exactly.
ministry. So
Yes.
thank you for that very much.
Yes. Yes. Another thing along those lines in terms of exegeting the congregation, Sue, the book that I just recently wrote called Preaching and Social Issues, I developed an assessment tool, and I'll put that into the chat to help preachers and congregation members think about what are the strengths and vulnerabilities of the preacher, the congregation, and the relationships within them. And it takes like 5 minutes. And when you're done, it gives you a recommendation of whether you should take a gentle, invitational, or robust approach to whatever social issue it is. And then in the book, there are 3 strategies for each of these approaches. So like 9 different tactics that you could use. So I will, I'll put some information about that into the follow-up. But the Preaching and Social Issues book can be really helpful for some guidance on like how to navigate these really tricky issues. Other questions?
Is this kind of our discussion time, Leah, or will you have more to your presentation?
I have a little bit more, but I have sort of a charge at the end.
Okay, okay.
But yeah, we can definitely like this is definitely time for us to debrief.
Well, I don't know if Matt is in a situation he can do this Matt sort of event, but I am thinking about how has created, it feels to me like a ecosystem um, of environmental concern in his congregation. I don't know, Matt, if you want to share just a little bit of what you've been working on in your congregation.
Sure. Yeah, my video keeps knocking off. If I disappear, hopefully I can
Right.
at least be heard. Oh, I could talk about this for an hour. I'll try to do a short version. We've done over the last 5 or 6 years a thing that we call Earthworks, which has 6 different teams. Like it kind of connects to what you're saying about different ways to getting people in different doors. And so we have a blue team that likes to just go out and explore nature and be in God's creation. We have a yellow team that likes to talk about worship and outdoor worship experiences and how we can do kind of an annual worship thing. An orange team that talks about food and water resources. A red team that talks about how we can advocate and what that advocacy looks like. A purple team we call our scholars that do those book studies and
Mhm.
dig deeper. I'm seeing a couple on your bibliography to add to our list. And I always forget one of them. But anyway, it's a kind of a broad-based way to understand that not everybody's going to want to do this the same way. And so as we engage folks. I used Dr. Height's work and some of my work over the years, and that framework stuff is exactly right. Right, folks are just not going to all think about this the same way and be invited in the same way. So I don't know if Ruth, if that's kind of what you had in mind, just kind of a quick glance at some of that work that we're doing.
Yeah, I just being at your church once in a while and reading the newsletters and stuff. It does seem like there's, it's always around, if you will, the different
Sure, sure.
teams. And people are entering different doors, but it seems to me then there's also times where they're inviting others to join them in a particular kind of activity,
Right, right.
planning a service that's for everybody, and
Yeah, yeah.
different kinds of things. Like some of them go out to the mountains and climb, but then they have a service
Mhm.
from speaking from the Rocky Mountains, or so it kind of does engage my sense the whole kind of congregation. And I don't know how much you're talking about climate change, but it does seem to me that it creates this, this ecosystem of concern
Hmm.
for the
Hmm.
environment and engagement with the environment.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah.
great.
Oh, the last one is the green team, like you're saying, Ruth. Just kind of these are the folks that just want to do something, right? So there's the light bulbs and the recycling folks that want to kind of just say, how do we do something practical? And so yeah, I think all those different things are helpful and kind of just keep it in front of folks. It makes it a programmatic way to do what is instead of just a thing every couple, like you say, twice a year, it becomes a thing that we can do pretty much all year round.
So I love this. Do you have an actual rainbow with these different, like, do you do this visually
Hmm.
where, like, okay, the yellow team is doing this, and like, do you have this on a church wall somewhere, and these are the things that are coming up? Because that is really cool.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have it necessarily as because it's hit and miss. Like we'll do some groups will do something twice a year, some groups will do something, 3 times a month, and so they don't each like have their own billboard necessarily. But yeah, we use that some of that rainbow imagery around, and then yeah, definitely in the newsletter, there's kind of blocks of okay, here's the next thing the orange team's doing, and it kind of catches folks' eyes.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, that would be a wonderful sermon around, you know, when we think about the imagery of the rainbow and what did it mean,
Hmm.
this
Hmm.
covenant of
Hmm.
God saying, I'm not going to destroy the earth. And knowing that human beings now have the capacity to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
can we make that covenant with God as well? And
Yeah.
here's how our church is doing that.
Yeah.
That could be really powerful for continued biblical framing of this
That's
work that they're
great.
doing. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
beautiful. I see Sherry's hand.
Yeah, hi. So I work for Kansas Interfaith Action and I my job is rural outreach. So I'm going into small rural congregations and preaching. Um, so I'm kind of debating with myself about I've had good luck, going in and talking about my own experiences with farming because I'm a farmer as well. Um, and some of the conversations afterwards have been kind of surprising. Like people are a little more open to talking about climate, but they don't use the word climate. Like
Mm-hmm.
they use words like taking care of the land and
Yep.
things like that. So I'm debating with myself, like I hear what you're saying about it being important to use those words, climate change. Is was any of the research specified divided out more for like rural people? Is it, should I still be using that language? Is that just going to send up barriers? Yeah. So
Yeah, no, that's a great question. The my understanding from reading their research is that they were simply counting beans. Like how many times do we hear it? Because they really wanted to see, like their main thing was looking at Catholics, but they did these other denominational sermons as well to as control groups. So they did not. There was no way for them to know what was the context of these thousands and thousands of churches. But so your question is a valid one, and I think that the code switching and using terms that don't automatically turn people off, it's a valid concern. Um, and what I worry about are the pastors who are in places where they probably could say it, but they're not because they still feel like, maybe I shouldn't. And are there ways for us to do this, not like right in the sermon right away, but to kind of till the soil and have some pastoral conversations to say, I'm not an environmentalist, but I'm really concerned about climate change. Just like in normal conversation, I'm, um, I'm not a tree hugger, but I'm really concerned about coffee and what climate change is doing to, you know, um, coffee crops. Because like I love my coffee. Actually, I don't drink coffee, but using ways to say, I'm not this thing that you think, but I am really concerned about this, is a way to help bring that into the conversation so that it becomes normalized and not just a knee-jerk reaction, a term that just makes people say, not listening, la 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 la. So, but that's about developing relationships with people over time. For somebody like you who's going into congregations where you don't know what the conversations have been, probably doing, a little bit more of careful terminology is necessary because you want people to at least stay sitting in the pew and listening to you.
right. Okay. Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah,
Okay.
good. Thanks, Sherry. What has been others' experience with doing this kind of preaching? Have you gotten pushback? Have you not even tried yet? If you haven't tried, what's your hesitation? Have you done some things and it's been going well and you want to share? What's happening in your congregations?
I will just say that anytime I can involve the children in something, my
Yep.
congregation loves it. right?
Yes.
We've done things to create awe and wonder. We've had our children plant in our community garden, and now those flowers are adorning our altar. I think that we as a congregation have been doing a lot of things that are oriented around creation care, but maybe not have affirmed it in that way, right? It's just been part of the life, and they've kind of been doing it, but they haven't really connected it as much. I don't know. That could be I could be wrong about that, but building some intentionality into all that and recognizing that that's part of our identity is part of what I'm working on. We're about ready to celebrate our 75th anniversary, and because I think it's missional, that there are
Yes.
younger people that are very much concerned about this issue. I would like to be able to say something that, we've been caring for creation in many different ways for the length of time that we've been a church.
Yeah.
Um, so, so doing that is a way of saying, this is who you are.
Yes. Yes.
So if you understand that this is who you are, how can you dispute then
Right.
that we
Right.
shouldn't be doing
Right.
this?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's beautiful, Sue. And I'll just say, just on Sunday, I preached for the 75th anniversary of the first church that I served in Media, Pennsylvania, Reformation Lutheran Church. So it's a lot of work to plan those, but it is so joyous. So I'm so happy for your church that they're going to do this. And one of the things that I talked about in the sermon is that so they're Lutheran, and so their name is Reformation Lutheran Church. And I talked about one of the ways this church has continually been reforming itself is to say that our ministry is not just with the human community, it is with our earth kin. And we
Mhm.
started this eco reformation, um, you know, 15 years ago, and you all are still doing it. And you're planting pollinator gardens, and you've got a labyrinth, and you're still doing this work. And so, yes, understanding that this is part of our history, it's consistent with our mission now, and what is God calling us to in the future has that nice thread of consistency. The other
And
thing
I'll
I'll,
just
yeah, go ahead,
sorry.
Sue.
I
No,
just
no,
no
go ahead.
Noni is sitting here and she's right on my screen. She is the leader of our congregation's creation care team, which started a few years ago. So
Oh, beautiful.
many of these things are being lifted up and as part of structure and placed in that space of caring for creation. And so we're not big enough to have a red and a blue and a green and an orange team, but at least a structure in place to continue to integrate what we've got going on into the hearts and minds so that it's more deeply understood.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. One of the things that I had done with the last congregation that I served full time was I did a children's sermon series on who are our neighbors in creation. And each week I with the kids, we featured a different aspect of what was outside. So one Sunday, the mulberry tree was, it was giving out mulberries. So I took the kids and we collected all the mulberries, and they gave out mulberries to people to eat during the children's sermon. And we talked about what's the scientific name of the tree, and what's the human name for the tree, and what does it do for us, and like, this is our name. And so we made a poster, and then we did one with, like, a squirrel and um, a turkey that just happened to walk into our, because we were in a rural area. So I got a picture of this turkey, and we talked, and each week we added another poster to the walls so that we saw that the worshiping congregation is not just inside, it is all God's creation. The scripture is very clear that the mountains clap their hands, that the swallows make their nests at the altar of the Lord. And so these are our neighbors who are helping to worship God as well. And people love that. Oh my God, I just went crazy over it.
So Chris has written a comment, Chris Wilson. St. Andrews does a blend of education, advocacy, and celebrating just being in creation. We are continuing to encourage more in the church to be involved in these efforts. We have some strong advocates, but always seeking to invite more in these efforts.
Yeah, so let me go back to the PowerPoint because I'm going to give you some other ideas for how you might do some different things. Um, let's see here. Okay, so if you are looking for ways to up your creation commitment, I'll give you some challenges here. To be ambitious, to think about what is our climate ambition, thinking about not just the grassroots, the things that people are doing on the local level, but also the treetops. What is the advocacy that we're doing? What are ways that we can be aware of what's happening in our local community, in our nation, and how can we respond to those concerns at the local and the larger level. Jim Antal, a really prominent religious environmental activist in the United Church of Christ, has said that he would love to see churches and denominations dedicate 25% of their human and financial and time resources to climate action. So thinking about what are we going to dedicate ourselves to, how are we going to make this commitment, and how can we follow through? Now, 25%, especially if you're starting at maybe 0 to 5%, seems like a lot. So what I've done is I've broken this down into smaller steps. So first of all, establish a baseline. Where are we now? What are our goals? Let's make a plan. How can we know if we're making any improvement if we're not able to measure the results? So if your church doesn't even have an eco ministry team yet, maybe that's one of your goals. If your church isn't recycling yet, maybe that's one of your goals. If your church hasn't changed out, it's like do easy wins, low hanging fruit to draw down the harm that we are doing to God's creation. And then I suggest a creation tithe. We all know that the tithe is 10%, that we give this first fruits to God. So think about, can we drive 10% less? Can we dedicate just 10% of our church property to like a butterfly garden or a rain garden? Can we look at our energy bills and think about how we can do a 10% energy drawdown? Maybe that will lead to conversations about putting in solar or geothermal. Tithe your meal, eating 10% less meat. A lot of people will do meatless Mondays. The meat is an extremely expensive in terms of what it costs the environment to produce meat for us. It's very expensive. So if we can get our proteins from plant-based, we can draw down on that. That's another way to tithe. And then think about your church's benevolence. What are some local eco-justice initiatives that are happening that your church can dedicate 10% of that, build it actually right into the budget? So that gets you your first 10%. After you've done some of those things, think about the double tithe. So these are larger scale changes. Can we dedicate 20% of our benevolent funds to local ecological restoration efforts, such as waterway cleanups? Can we allot 20% of Christian education to learn about environmental racism and how the church can advocate with their siblings of color for ecological justice? Now, when I say environmental racism, I'm thinking about, for example, in a church that I used to serve in Delaware County, Chester, which was part of Delaware County, the city, was the primary dumping grounds for Delaware County. And Chester happens to be primarily African American, and the rest of Delaware County happens to be white. So all of the trash was going down to Delaware County, down to Chester, and there's trash incinerators and lead poisoning, and just created a huge environmental injustice issue. Also thinking about um, the in Louisiana, where all of the toxic industries are located, mostly in African American congregations or neighborhoods. So thinking about environmental justice, and can we dedicate 20% of our education to this? Removing meat from 20% of the church meals. So if you're doing a potluck, to say, hey, let's make sure that 20% of our um, options are a meatless protein. And I've heard of some churches doing like meatless taste testing. So, doing Impossible Burger and Gardein and, like different kinds, and have people taste and say, ooh, I like this one better, to show that there's options for this. And there's all kinds of meatless chicken nuggets, and have people try different ones and say, well, that actually tastes pretty good. Yes. And you're using less resources for the earth to do that. And then thinking about transitioning to low carbon energy, such as solar, wind, or geothermal, and helping people understand that the investment that you put in here, the initial investment, will help the church's bottom line in, anywhere from 5 to 10 years. So once you've gotten that 20, then you got to get your 5, your last 5. So you're going to strive for 5. So can we think about a 5% reduction in our water runoff? Can we put in rain barrels or a rain garden? Can we think about 5% of our benevolent fund to a church in an under-resourced area to help them meet their climate ambition goals? Can we think about the local clean energy co-op and see if we can get 5% of our membership to sign up to be part of the clean energy co-op? So that's how you make that last 5%. So it would be a plan that you would put in place over, say, the next 5 years. So this is about where you feel the energy and where your congregation feels the energy. Are you thinking about creation clarity, like clear communication about the crisis in order to wake people up and take action? Or are you feeling more about creation compassion, maybe working with interfaith partners to lament creation and help build what I call the eco-ethical arc? Maybe you're thinking about creation commitment, helping your congregation take concrete steps to protect and restore God's creation. Overall, we want to make sure that we are proclaiming the good news in all of this, sharing stories of where people are acting to protect God's creation inspires people. If all we do is talk about how bad things are, that leaves people depressed and feeling that it's hopeless. So if we say, look at what this church is doing, we could do this, that gets people sparked, like sparks their theological imagination, showing how we can participate in God's redemption for earth, giving examples, givings like, hey, let's do this. This is an opportunity to show up for the least of these. We are not trying to give false hope, but authentic hope. And we are trying to preach God's eco-resurrection. So those are my challenges for you. We have about 10 more minutes to, go ahead, Mooney.
I have 2 questions. First, do you have a good energy audit tool that congregations can use, before getting a professional energy audit? IPL used to have one, but it's kind of outdated and they don't exist anymore. And sometimes, like the ones on Energy Star are so complicated. Do you know of a good one?
I don't. I have not done a lot of research on that.
Okay.
I would recommend doing a Google search, and because yes, if it there's like a long checklist for a lot of these, and and you give this to a group of people and you're like, that's a lot of work. Making sure that your insulation is right, and changing all of it. Like if you can do, break it down into smaller steps,
Okay.
that helps. It's like we're not going to do all this. We're just going to do one step at a time so that it feels manageable.
Yeah.
I think that's the most important thing.
Okay.
You had
Then,
another question.
yeah. Our our recent bishop and now our new bishop have done some listening sessions with farmers and rural people related to the struggles that they're having. I mean, it's all interconnected with
Yeah.
tariffs. And so the first one was in March. And then last week, our new bishop had another one. And this seems like a really important way for those of us working on climate change because the water issues, and we cover Kansas and Missouri in the Central State Synod. So, um, do you have any experience with other places that are working on those issues, thoughts, ideas? It's so big. It's so, I mean, it's massive.
Yeah.
And yeah, just how to get at that. Because I think we in our work with creation care and climate justice can be really good advocates for farmers and rural people. And that's a good way to build some good bonds because sometimes there's kind of a clash.
Right.
So, just thoughts or points or suggestions?
Yeah. Yeah. I, in my book, Preaching in the Purple Zone, I talk about the work of doing deliberative dialogue where you talk about an issue and you think about what are three different approaches to this issue and what are the pros and cons of this approach, not solution, but like what are different ways that we could come at this. And then when you're looking at these different approaches, you say, what are the upsides of this, but what are the possible downsides of this? So that we're using our critical thinking skills to say, well, if we tried this, here's the good things that could happen, but here might be some things that we didn't anticipate that could also happen. And through that process, you come out on the other side and you say, okay, we've looked at these three different approaches. What do we discern as the things that are, what are the values that are most important to us? What is the common ground that we share? And out of this can emerge like, okay, we all care about clean water. Great. Okay, we might disagree on the policies to do that, but if we can at least say we agree on that this is important, or we agree that protecting this land for future generations is important. Great. We're not sure exactly how that's going to happen, but we at least agree on these principles, that these ideas. And then the last step of the process is to say, okay, what are some next steps that we could take that are in alignment with these values? You know, small steps, low hanging fruit, that like, where is God calling us to go on this? So I would recommend in the book, Preaching in the Purple Zone, I lay out the whole process for
Okay,
doing this.
great.
There are actual issue guides for climate change, and there is also one on land use. Um, but you can also, they have courses for like how to do this on your own and how to make your own issue guide. So I will put that into the information that I send to Ruth as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Great question, Noni.
And in your book, you really connect this deliberative dialogue process with preaching.
Yes.
Very intentionally, don't you?
Right. So the idea is that if you in your congregation has discerned that, okay, we're going to talk about this issue, you're going to start with a sermon that says, hey, we're going to talk about this. It's what I call the prophetic invitation to dialogue. That you're not taking a stand one way or the other. You're just saying, look, this is something that concerns us. You're making the case that the Bible shows us that God cares about political issues, politics meaning the things that are concerned with the polis, the citizens, and there's political stuff all throughout the Bible, and God cares about this. So it's okay for us to talk about this. And I don't have the answers, but I'm really interested in the questions. And I think we can do much more together on this than any one of us can do alone. So I'm inviting you all to this dialogue. And the dialogue could be like a one session, or it could take place over 3 or 4 or 5. And then the sermon on the other end is a result of listening to what these discernment sessions have been about and those values that have emerged. And the question is, okay, how did God show up for this in this conversation, show up for us in this conversation? And where might God be calling us as we're moving forward? And so this is not something that one person says this is what we have to do, but this is the Spirit guiding us as we've been discerning together. So it's really a process of what I would call homiletical accompaniment for these issues. Other questions?
Yeah, it strikes me that even getting to using that term climate change, perhaps that kind of a structure could be helpful.
Yeah.
I do run into that dilemma. I feel very frustrated. In fact, as the title of this whole series is, I use that word climate change in there because the word climate change evokes some sense of it's important to do this, and it's really right now it's an emergency, it's a crisis.
Yes.
Whereas creation care is very much the grounding, but it doesn't have that urgent edge
Yes.
to it. So I kind of
Yes.
struggle with that too. But yeah, you don't want to trigger up people and turn people off. And, many of us are from Kansas, where our legislatures in our, they can't tolerate the word climate change. They never can say that word, apparently,
Right.
from what I hear. So we're kind of in that situation, but perhaps this more deliberative process with the sermons, just this openness where you're not pushing stuff on people, but you're actually I don't know, maybe even could introduce what that term means in that kind of a process. I'm not sure, but it strikes
Yeah, I
me
mean,
definitely.
I think it's a question that we can ask is, what does the term mean to you?
Hmm.
Just write it on your bulletin. What does climate change mean to you? And just have people just stand up and say, like, this is like, and just say, isn't this interesting that we have such a panorama of different interpretations of this word?
Mhm.
And then, here's the Webster version of it. And why do you think
Mhm.
there is so much controversy on this?
Mhm.
And the really important question, who do you think benefits from us fighting about these terms? Who's profiting from us having these kinds of this kind of divisiveness? Because it's a lot easier for people who are doing things to harm the environment if we're fighting amongst ourselves on the terms that we can use to talk about it and distract from the harm that's actually happening.
Yeah. 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 Well, thank you. It looks like our questions and comments are kind of slowing down, and we're coming right to the end of our time together. So thank you so much, Dr. Shade, for this time and a lot of really helpful and interesting perspectives that I think we can continue to think about and read about because you've written about them as well as we move forward in leadership of faith communities and in preaching and teaching. So thank you so very much.
Yeah, I appreciate all of your attention and the great questions. You're doing the work. So be encouraged. You are doing the work.
Yeah. And then I just wanted to remind the group here, that we will meet again in a couple weeks. Not next week, but on November 11th, same time, same Zoom link. And we'll be focusing on ministry opportunities in the context of climate change, building church and community resilience, advocacy, climate justice, and mercy ministries to those affected by climate change. And we'll have with us Josh Richardson, who has developed a home ministry, the Brugmansia Ministries, to encourage churches to do this. So that'll be a rich session as well. We've talked on some of it about environmental justice, but he will lead us furthermore and have a time for discussion. So again, thanks all of you for participating. Thank you, Dr. Shade, for your time and wisdom. And to all of you. Have a wonderful rest of the day.